All right. Well, hello everyone, and welcome to today's basic Hebrew session for the Bible study Hickory on this 30th day of October 2022. When we left off last week, we were taking a look at Hebrew prepositions. Now, there are some prepositions in Hebrew that we refer to as being inseparable. That is, they will join themselves directly to the word, to the noun. And so, thus, these three inseparable prepositions, we refer to them as the Lamed preposition, which indicates direction, reception, and thus we would translate it as to or for. Then we also have the Beth preposition, which signifies location, and thus we translate it as in. And then we also have the Kaf preposition, which indicates manner or comparison, and so we translate it as or like. Now, normally, these three inseparable prepositions are pointed with a simple vocal schwa. But there are cases, such as we saw last week, where they will assume the pointing of the article. And thus, let me just go ahead and show you this here. So this is in my document, Common Changes in Hebrew Spelling. And this portion of it entitled Resolution of Article and Inseparable Preposition when they are prefixed to the same Hebrew word. And so thus, if the article and an inseparable preposition are prefixed to the same Hebrew word, the hey of the article, remember the article in Hebrew is hey with a pathak followed by a dagesh forte. So the hey of the article will drop out, and then the preposition then adopts or assumes the pointing of the article. So for example, if I took the word davar, which means expression in Hebrew, and then I put the article on it, so hey with a pathak followed by a dagesh forte on davar, so I now have had davar, the expression. So davar, expression, had davar, the expression. But now I'm going to put the prepositions on it. And this works if it is the Lamed preposition, if it is the Beth, or if it is the Kaf. They all three behave in the same way. I'm just using the Lamed here as an example. The Lamed preposition is definitely seen very frequently in the text of Scripture. So the Lamed preposition here, so the Lamed pointed with the simple vocal schwa on hadavar. Well, now, because of the fact that the hey of the article is preceded by this preposition, and because of the fact that the hey is a very weak consonant sound, that hey will therefore drop out. And as a result, then, the vowel that was underneath the hey thus now no longer has a consonant. That is an impossibility. So what then does one preposition do? Or any preposition? It will go ahead and stop.
Your reception is going or something.
Oh, I think that may be because there is some static coming from Brother Michael's mic.
Oh, okay. Brother Michael, would you close your mic, please? There you go. Thank you, sir.
All right. So thus, we then have the pathak of the article without a consonant, which is an impossibility in Hebrew. And so as a result, the Lamed preposition or the Beth preposition or the Kaf preposition will go ahead and adopt or assume the pointing of the article. And thus that leaves us then with la davar. So the Lamed preposition here, indicating that idea of two. And then down here we have the vowel of the article. And then over here we have the noun davar. And so thus, la davar would be to the expression. Now, as well, this same type of thing happens when you have a word that begins with a guttural. Remember, those gutturals are going to be the aleph, hey, hey, ayin. And so thus, if I take then the word Adam, which is in fact the word man, human, and I put the article on it, so thus hey with a pathak followed by a dagesh forte, as we have here in this instance. Well, here you can see that the dagesh forte is inside of the guttural. But there's a problem with that because of the fact that the guttural cannot be doubled and thus cannot take the dagesh forte. So the guttural will therefore reject the dagesh forte of the article, and as a result, then the preceding vowel underneath the article lengthens, leaving us with ha-adam in this instance. Now I'm going to put the article on the front, the preposition on the front of it. So thus, the lameth preposition in this case on the front of the word. So now, instead of ha-adam, I have le-ha-adam. But the problem with that is the hey of the article is a very weak consonant. And so, as a result, under the influence of the prefixed preposition, that hey is going to drop out, which means now that the kametz there, that was underneath the hey of the article, it no longer has a consonant, which is an impossibility in Hebrew. And so what happens? The preposition gives the kametz a home. And so thus we then have la avam in this instance. And there should be a kametz there. So thus we have the lameth preposition right here, to, and then this pointing there, that represents the article, so to the, and then you have adam, which is the noun, so to the human. And so that then is how the preposition and the article being attached to the same Hebrew word, that is how that reconciles itself. Now, there is one more preposition that I want to introduce here before we move on further, and that is going to be the men preposition here. So the preposition men. This preposition, we do not call it an inseparable preposition because it may either be separate from the noun or it may also, in certain instances, attach itself to the noun. So it may stand alone or it may be attached. So this is not an inseparable preposition because it can be separated from the noun. But this preposition men has the basic idea of from. It indicates separation in that respect. As a matter of fact, what is interesting, if I were to take you over here into the Hebrew text, and if we were to come on down and take a look at, well, let me just do this search here. So notice, especially when we come on down here to Genesis 1:21, and God created great whales and every living creature that moveth, which the waters brought forth abundantly after their kind, and every winged fowl after his kind, and God saw that it was good. The Hebrew word that is translated kind here is the word mean. And in some instances as well, you can also see it as mina. But basically this idea of mean, and if I come on over to, we'll just use this. So thus we have then, so mean, kind, and now let me write the Hebrew preposition men, from, indicating this idea of separation. And notice you can see the similarities in the two words here, mean, men. They come, in fact, from the same root idea. And this makes perfect sense Because what are we saying? That an animal is created after its kind. We're saying, in essence, that this particular kind of animal, whether it is the cat kind, the dog kind, the bear kind, etc., they all have characteristics that are associated with that particular kind. And those characteristics then separate them from the other kinds as well. And so, thus, you might have two kinds. Example, we'll take cat and dog for example here. And dogs, and by dog kind, we're including basically canines in general. They will have certain characteristics here, and then felines will have another certain set of characteristics. And by virtue of those two different sets of characteristics, they are distinct. They are made distinct. They are made separate from one another. And so there is then this separation that exists between those kinds. And thus it makes perfect sense then that the word kind and men, which indicate separation, would come from the same root. So that was free. But so the preposition men here, from, indicating separation, it may stand independently of its object, or it may be attached or prefixed to its object, especially when that object does not have the article he with a pathak followed by a dagesh forte. When attached, its vowel pointing is adjusted according to the nature of the consonant which follows it. So for example here, so we're looking at it just when it is attached, connected to the word. So before normal consonants, that is not the gutturals aleph, hey, kaith, and ayin, the vowelless noon is assimilated and a dagesh forte compensative is placed in the following consonant. For example, when men is attached to the word sha'ul, the combination min sha'ul becomes misha'ul, because the vowelless noon is assimilated by the following letter, and a dagesh forte is placed in that following letter to indicate that the noon was present. Now, let me come back over here to this document. So, vowelless noon assimilation. So, here we have then a vowelless noon, that is a noon that is pointed with a silent schwa, will assimilate. And as a result, then, a dagesh forte will be placed in the following letter to compensate for the loss of the noon, and we refer to this as the dagesh forte compensative. So, example here, I'm taking the word davar, expression again, here, and I'm going to put the men preposition on the front of it. So now, instead of just davar, I have mendavar. Now, this schwa underneath the noon is silent. How do I know that? Well, because of the fact that this vowel here, that hirik, it is short, it is in an unaccented syllable, and so short unaccented syllable because the accent is going to be here on the bait, the last syllable of the word. And so as a result, short vowels have a tendency to prefer closed, unaccented syllables. And so, therefore, if I have a short vowel that prefers a closed, unaccented syllable, then that means then that the noon is going to be closing the syllable, and thus the schwa is silent because silent schwas close syllables. One of the interesting things about noons that are vowelless, that is, that have that silent schwa underneath them, is they have a tendency to assimilate, that is, to become like the consonant that follows them. And so thus, the noon will drop out, a dagesh forte is then placed in the following letter, and then as a result, it is doubled, and we still have that closed syllable for the hirik. So thus, instead of mendavar, I have midavar. So notice here the dagesh forte indicating the assimilation of the noon. So thus, this here, I have the min from, and then I have davar expression. And so that is what we're looking at there. Now, same thing here, same type of thing happens when we're dealing with a word that begins with a guttural. So I have then the word adam, human. Now I'm going to put the men preposition on the front of it. So now instead of just adam, I have min adam. Well, you can see once again, the noon here is going to be closing the syllable. And as a result, then that schwa that is underneath the noon is therefore going to be silent. And as a result, then the schwa there, it's silent. The noon is thus going to assimilate. It drops out. And a dagesh forte is placed in the following letter. But we have a problem here. The following letter is an aleph. An aleph is a guttural. Those gutturals are aleph, hey, cheth, ayin. And remember, gutturals, they can't be doubled because of the fact that they are pronounced so far back in the throat. As a result, then, if they can't be doubled, they can't take the dagesh forte. And so the aleph here is going to reject the dagesh forte. And so thus, the preceding vowel will lengthen. Now, we might anticipate that a hirik would lengthen to a hirik yod, but that's not what happens here. Because if that's what happens, then we add a consonant to the consonantal text. We would add a yod there. Well, we don't want to do that. We don't want to add to the consonantal text of scripture. So what happens? Well, I class of vowels and E class of vowels are very close in pronunciation. And so thus the hirik, instead of lengthening to the hirik yod, is going to lengthen to the seirei. And so as a result, then I wouldn't have mi avam, I would have me avam. And so thus the mem pointed with the seirei, that is going to be the preposition from. And then as well, I have adam, my noun there, from human, we would say. So that is basically what we're talking about when we're talking about noon assimilation and vowel lengthening when we're dealing with these, with this particular preposition. And you will see that happen, let's say, not infrequently. So same thing here. Notice memelik. So I have the mem of the min preposition pointed with that hirik, and then the noon represented by that dagesh forte in the following letter. So thus, we would then have memelik, which would be from king. Miyom, again, I have the mem of the men preposition, and I have the dagesh forte inside the yod representing the noon that has assimilated. And then I have the word yom, day, so from day. And then I also have milaila. And so in this instance, I have the mem, the dagesh forte, and the lamed represents the assimilation, the noon that has assimilated. And then I have the noun laila here, so from night. So we see that. Now let's come on down here as well. So before the gutturals or before resh, because resh, like the gutturals, cannot take the dagesh forte, the vowelless noon is assimilated, but as we saw on that other document, the gutturals and resh reject the dagesh forte and the preceding vowel is lengthened from hirik to seirei. And so thus in this instance, I have may ear. Well, so the men preposition attached to the noun ear, but the dagesh forte that would have been right here because the noon assimilated, well, it would have gone inside of the guttural rejected, and then the preceding vowel here lengthened. And so thus we have me'ir from city. Same thing next. So I would have had min hoshek, then the noon would have assimilated and a dagesh forte been placed in the following letter. But the cheth, being a guttural, rejected that dagesh forte and the preceding vowel lengthened. So me hoshek, from darkness. And then same thing over here as well. Min rosh, but the noon assimilated. Dagesh forte placed in the following letter, but the following letter happens to be a resh, which cannot be doubled. And so thus it rejects the dagesh forte and the preceding vowel lengthens, giving us merosh, from head. Now, notice here as well, last thing in this particular section. When preceding a word which has the article he with a pathak followed by a dagesh forte, which is itself a guttural letter, the preposition may remain separate, as for instance in men hamelek. So you can see in this instance we have men, which is going to be that preposition, and then hamelek, he with the pathak followed by a dagesh forte, the article on the word melek. So from the king. But the noon here, it has not assimilated because of the fact that it is not attached to the words, which remains there. But also in some instances as well, you may see the men attach itself to a word beginning with the article, as in, for instance, mehamelek. So here you have Hamelek, the king. The men attaches, the noon assimilated, dagesh forte thus placed inside of the he, but the he rejected the dagesh forte, and as a result, then the preceding vowel lengthened to the tsere, and thus we have me hamelek. And you can see, as we have here, the methag holding that syllable open as well. And similar thing here happens as well with me ha'adam, from the man, or from me ha'afar, from the dust. So that just is a quick overview of the men preposition. Now, what I would like to do at this particular point is to show you how some of this applies. And thus, coming on over here, then to Genesis chapter 1, verses 6 through 8. So we have been spending a lot of time in Genesis 1 through 5. So we're familiar with that by now, but let's take a look again at Genesis 6 through 8. And God said, "Let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters. And God made the firmament, and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament. And it was so. And God called the firmament heaven, and the evening and the morning were the second day." So that's the English text that we're looking at here. Now, let's come on down to the Hebrew text, verses 6 through 8. So here we have then, Vayomer Elohim, Yehi Rakia Bethok Hamayim, Wihi Mavdil Bein Mayim Lamayim, Vayas Elohim Eth Harakia, Vayavdel Bein Hamayim, Asher Mitachath Larakia, Uvein Hamayim Asher Me'al Larakia, Vayihi Kain. Vayikra Elohim Larakia Shamayim, Vayihi Erev, Vayihi Voker Yom Sheni. So here, if we just walk through this, our first word here, Vayomer, and you can see on the front here, and let me just make sure I'm on the right color. Vayomer, we have wow with the pathak followed by a dagesh forte. That's going to be our wow consecutive on an imperfect. Remember, the imperfect aspect indicates incomplete action, but when you have the wow consecutive on the front, it flips the aspect and makes the verb perfect, thus completed action. Here we have the yod of the imperfect. The yod indicates, so those imperfect performatives, aleph, yod, tau, nun, where the aleph indicates first common singular. Let me do this here. So the aleph, yod, tau, and nun. So the aleph would indicate first common singular. The noon indicates first common plural. The yod indicates third masculine singular or plural, and the tau is basically the catch-all. So this would be then second masculine singular or plural, second feminine singular or plural, and third feminine singular or plural. So we have here yod, which means it's going to be either third masculine singular or third masculine plural. Well, to tell the difference, I look to the end to see if there is a U-class vowel. There's no U-class vowel here, so that means this is going to be third masculine singular. And on the word amar, which is basically the idea of to say. So I would translate this particular word then, wayomer, as then he said. Well, who said? Remember, in Hebrew, the subject has a tendency to follow the verb. So if this is the verb, then our subject would be right here, Elohim. And that is in fact our subject here. And we know Elohim, this is God. So then God said, what is it that he said? Well, he said basically the remainder of the verse here. So this is the remainder of the verse. So yehi, this is going to be a kal imperfect, third masculine singular of the verb haya. So thus, will exist. What is it that will exist? Rakia. That is going to be that thin, stretched out layer. And so thus we'll say, I'll go ahead and use the English word for now, but will exist firmament. The word rakia literally means a thin, stretched out layer, which is perfectly representative of the atmosphere. And then you have bathok. Now, what's interesting is bathok here is actually a composite word. You have the Baith preposition on the front of tawik, which is basically the idea of midst. Now remember, the Baith preposition is one of our inseparable prepositions. The lameth, which indicates direction or reception. The Baith indicates location, and then the kaf preposition indicates manner comparison. So Baith preposition, location, in, and then tawik, middle. So in middle of, well, in middle of what? Hamayim here. And you can see hey with the pathak followed by a dagesh forte. I've got my article. And then mayim, well, that's going to be waters. So the waters. And now, and you'll hear me use this term later here when we get a little bit further into the course, but the relationship between tawik and hamayim here is what we call a construct absolute construction. And because of the nature of that particular construction, the fact that hamayim is definite means also that tawik is definite. So this is not in middle of the waters, it would be in the middle of the waters there. So a firmament will exist in the middle of the waters. Then what will happen? Wihi, and you can see we have that same word that we had up above, yihi, but it has the conjunction on the front of it. So and will exist. So this rakia will exist in a certain manner, and that manner is identified here in the following word. This word is a participle. That means it is indicating that idea of durative action. And it is hifil. So remember those different verb stems in Hebrew that we talked about. The kal, nifal, piel, pual, hifil, hofal, hithpael. Well, if the kal indicates basic action and the piel indicates intensive action, the hifil indicates causative action. So thus, this action is causing something. Causing what? Well, the verb badal here means distinction. So causing distinction. Bain, this is going to be another preposition. It means between. So between mayim, there's our word there again, mayim. So between waters, and then we have lamayim, and you can see the lamed preposition there on the word mayim. So two waters. So notice this construction here. This rakia is going to exist, causing distinction bain mayim lamayim, between waters to waters. So in other words, we have waters here, that idea of fluid matter, and then we have waters down here, and this rakia is going to be in the midst of it, between these waters and waters, and it creates a distinction between those waters. And so then we come on down a little bit further. Vayas Elohim eth ha-rakia. So here you have again that wow consecutive that we just saw up above, but this is on the verb asa, which means to make. So then he made. Who made? Well, our subject follows it. So then God made. What did he make? Eth, there's our definite object marker again. So ha-rakia. And you can see there's that word rakia again, but on the front of it, we have hey with a pathak followed by a dagesh forte, except for the fact that the resh rejected the dagesh forte and the preceding vowel lengthened. So the firmament, the thin stretched out layer. And then we have wayavdale. Do you see the similarity between this verb here and this participle here? Same root word. You can see the Beth Daleth Lameth as well here, the Beth Daleth Lameth. Same exact word there. Except now, instead of it being a participle, this is now a finite verb in the imperfect aspect. And the pathak underneath the yod here is indicating it's still hifil. So causative. Then he, referring to the rakia, caused distinction. And then you have bain hamayim. There's that bain again that we had up here. So between hamayim, there's the waters again. Hey with the pathak followed by a dagesh forte on the word mayim. And then you have asher mitachath la rakia. So asher, that's just a relative pronoun. Which. So which waters are we talking about here? Between the waters, mitachath. Notice here, notice the mem and then the dagesh forte there in the tal. Guess what this is? That's going to be that men preposition that we just saw. And so thus from, and if tawek has the idea of middle, tachath has the idea of under. So mitachath, from, under, and then we have the lamed preposition and pointed with the vowel of the article and rakia there. So what had happened in this particular instance, we had rakia, hey with the pathak followed by a dagesh forte, but the resh rejected the dagesh forte, preceding vowel lengthened, and then we attach the lamed preposition. The hey drops out, the lamed assumes the pointing. So la rakia, to the firmament. So notice in essence what we have here. We have the men preposition, followed by tachath, another preposition meaning under, followed by still another preposition, the lamed preposition there. So basically from under up to the rakia. So which waters are we talking about here? We're talking about the waters that existed separated from underneath up to the rakia. But there's more here. Uvein hamayim asher me'al la rakia. So notice uvein again here. You can see bain, between, but we do have that conjunction on the front of it. It's just changed form underneath the influence of the base. So, and between, hamayim, the waters. Okay, with the pathak followed by a dagesh forte there. Asher, there's that relative again. Which. And then you have me'al. Well, we have this word here, al, which is a preposition upon, and then you have the mem here. Well, what has happened is we had the men preposition, the noon assimilated, resulting in that dagesh forte inside of the ayin, but the ayin being a guttural rejected the dagesh forte and the preceding vowel lengthened. So we then actually have here two prepositions, the men and al. So from and al means upon. So from upon la rakia. So there's rakia again, but here's the lamed preposition, and you can see it's pointed with the article there. So there's the same exact word that we had up above. To the firmament. So thus we have the waters which existed from underneath up to the firmament, and then we had the waters which existed from over up to the firmament. And so that is what that is saying there. And you can see the way that those prepositions then all interact with one another. And the interesting thing is, and I'll close with this. So the Lord did this, and then Wayihi Cain. Then it existed thus, in exactly the manner that the Lord described. All right. Is there anything that we need to add there, do you think, sir?
Are you saying there was actually liquid water above the atmosphere?
Yes, sir.
So you think just because the Hebrew scriptures say that, we should believe it?
Yes, sir.
Maybe we should believe the scientist, even the biblical creationist scientist who say, well, you couldn't have water up there. Water would evaporate. It wouldn't stay there. Huh. But you're telling me that what God said is he actually put liquid water above the atmosphere, and he had liquid water below the atmosphere. I wonder where all that liquid water above the atmosphere went. You know, we've talked about that before. If you had all the water on the earth spread out on a smooth surface of the earth, it would be somewhere just a little less than 2 miles deep. So if you had a mile deep on the surface of the earth, then you had the atmosphere, you could have a mile thickness of water above the atmosphere. That would be a lot of water. And I think that would probably drown everything on the surface of the earth if it all came down. Oh, well, this is not a biblical creation science class. This is Hebrew. And we know Hebrew is not biblical. Wait a minute. Maybe it is. Maybe there's a connection between reading the Hebrew as God wrote it and understanding biblical creation science as God wrote the Hebrew. Yes, Robert, it does sound like a flood to me. I'm amazed at how many people won't read the text the way it was written, though.
I have heard well, I don't remember the details, but it had to do with the rakia being ice and at super cold temperatures, magnetic and being held up by the magnetic force of the earth. I don't know, have you ever heard that, for one?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And secondly,
Yeah.
it says waters, and there's the word ice in Job, so I would go with waters, but
I would go with water because at this stage, he makes absolutely no distinction. And what these people, when these people come up with those ideas, they're trying to, what they're saying is liquid water could not exist as a layer above the atmosphere. But if they would stop for a moment and think that in reality, if God can bring an entire creation into existence, can he not have liquid water anywhere he wants liquid water? And see, we look at it now and we say, here we are 6,000 years later with all of our wonderful knowledge. And we say, this is what it must be. It had to be this. But the problem is, that's not what God said. If there was some indication in some way that the waters that were above the Rakia were not still magum, fully magum, that is basically liquid water, then I would say, very well, I might believe it. But there's no indication. Plus, there's another thing.
You want?
What?
Oh, do you want to share your desktop to illustrate what you're saying, or do you want me to?
No, I was going to ask you to write something on your desktop.
All right, I can do that.
What was that he created in the very first verse? What was it?
Oh, he created Shemayim.
Shamayim. Okay. We're not worried about edits right now. So we're not worried about edits. So you can erase edits. But notice the word Shamayim. Now, this is something that I heard from my Hebrew mentor back in the 80s, Dr. James Price. And I was looking up some of this too. What did I do with that, hon? Did I? Oh, hey.
There's his picture.
Guess what? I looked. He is still alive. This guy was born in 1925, and he's still alive. That means he is 97 years old. I don't know if you can see it. He and his wife, Dr. Price. And this is the guy who shall we say, ruined me and made me think Hebrew. So, but what he told us about this word, and he said, and there are basically, I think the conservative Hebrew scholars believe this, but nobody can prove it. It's unprovable because it's far, far too old. If you think about it, Shamayim, Bereshit bara Elohim es hashamayim wa es haaretz. The Shamayim, that's in the very first verse of everything that's written of the scriptures. That's the first verse. That means this was something that was written down by the hand of Adam, probably somewhere shortly after, just 100 years after creation. And it may not, we don't know exactly how long, but we have an idea because of some of the other historical elements in the first 4 chapters that he wrote the first 4 chapters. There's reason to believe that. And matter of fact, I don't doubt it. I don't doubt it a bit. I doubt all these other things where people say, oh, no, Moses did it. That's baloney. There is no indication that Moses wrote those things. But that's another matter. But if you look at the word, and he said what the conservative Jewish or Hebrew scholars would think, they see Shamayim as a composite word. And so would you go ahead and split it there? See, Mayim would be water, and Shah would be a shortened form of Sham. So maybe write out Sham there if you would, please. That's Sham. And if you put Sham with Mayim, it would be, so for the Shah part, put out there. Because Sham means there. It's like saying at that place, there at that place, at that location. And what they said is that, and many of these people actually believed that Adam was the writer of this, and they'd say Adam saw this, and so when Adam, here he is, he's living in the atmosphere. So when he sees water, water is below the atmosphere, and that's one of the Magims, and then there's water above the atmosphere. So when Adam was saying this, and he's considering pointing up toward heaven, he's pointing up or something, he'd be Sham Mayim, and like saying water's there. It's just like what so many country folks I've heard in the past would say things like, oh, you go down there to that there tree. They say to that there tree. Why do they say that there tree? What they mean is there's a tree in that place. So if Adam said Shamayim, he'd be saying Mayim there in that place. And then another thing, the word Mayim, from this very, very first usage, what is the ayim ending, Rebecca? You've got written there. Dual. That means two. So there was not just one water, there were two waters. And you think about this, when God did this, before he ever brought man into existence, so when he brought man into existence, there were two waters, two Mayims, if you will. There was a Mayim up there and a Mayim down there. There was a Mayim above the atmosphere and a Mayim below it. And so when Adam would express this, and in his perfect linguistic abilities built into him by God, Adam would point, and he would consider, when he's considering what's up there above the atmosphere, he would say Shamayim, waters there. There are waters there. And I don't think he probably could have figured out or asked God how thick the water layer was and how far it extended. But it didn't matter how far it extended, because he wasn't going to live up in the Shamayim. He was going to live on the earth, on the Eretz. So anyway, that's one of those things that why we believe that there was liquid water there, because it's so clear. That's what Adam said. And I got an idea that Adam knew far better than we know in the present day. He lived it for 930 years. And he didn't have to grow up for 30 years to learn it. He knew it from the beginning, from that sixth day of creation. So for 930 years, he lived this. And so anyway, and I'm sure he passed on his concept of this. And you think about it, that water remained there until, by whatever mechanism God saw fit, and we say, well, it rained 40 days and 40 nights. Well, that's absolutely true. But at the same time, it does not say how much it rained, how fast it rained. And I know people look now, see, we say we are not uniformitarian in our belief, but we look at this and we say, well, if it rained 40 days and 40 nights, and if you figure it only rained maybe maximum of 6 or 8 inches an hour, then you could, and we say, therefore, only a certain amount of water could have come down in that 40 days and 40 nights. Well, I understand. I'm an engineer. I can calculate these things. The problem is, if this was something done by God, then who is to say that the rain came down 40 days and 40 nights at the same rates that we think are essentially maxima in our present generation. And in reality, that's an absolute absurdity. That is us usurping authority over what God has said. And so somehow, by whatever mechanism, and it could be called rain, but it may have been much, much more than just rain. We say dump in buckets or something like that. It could have come down very fast, and especially in certain areas.
Mhm.
But
Not to mention the opening of the deep as well.
yes, and the windows of heaven.
Hmm.
And windows of heaven and the fountains of the great deep and all of that. But people say, well, most of the water would have come out from under the surface of the earth. I don't believe that. I believe a lot of it came out from there, but there was a very, very large amount of it that apparently came down from overhead. So because there was magma up there and there's magma down here above and below. And it's interesting the way you showed that on the thing.
Hmm.
See, it is significant that God used 3 prepositions in each place. He said that he caused a division or distinction between the magma, between the water, which existed from under to the rakia. So they existed from somewhere called under to the rakia. So from under to the rakia, and between the waters, typical Hebrew, bain and bain, using between twice, and then asher, which were from under to the rakia. So where he used 3 prepositions in the first, he used 3 prepositions in the second, and the only change was from the middle one, which was takat, which was under to the rakia, and the second one was al, above to the rakia. So it expresses some kind of a dimensional layer of liquid water below the rakia and above the rakia. So, and I know I'm a chemical engineer. I know I've heard all the scientific stuff, but I'm going to take what seems to be clear from the Word of God over what the so-called scholars say, or the creationists say, who do not know the Hebrew scriptures at all. And you may remember, some of you will remember, I pointed out to you, even as good as the Creation Museum is that AIG has built and all these other things, at the same time, when my wife and I visited there the first time, and we were going through the exhibits, and they had an exhibit of human writing, and they had the Hebrew text, like a page from the Hebrew Bible, and it was upside down. It was upside down. In other words, whoever built this thing about languages and linguistics did not even know the Hebrew alphabet, could not even recognize how Hebrew was written, but he built a display out of ignorance, and that was not good. And when we looked at one of the videos there, and that was the one, Jeff, you probably remembered, it was about, I think it was the first Adam and the last Adam that they had, and they also showed a page of Hebrew text there, and it was upside down. And you know what I have to say, I would like to have talked to Brother Ham after that and explained, but I cannot imagine that someone had not seen that before. There had to be somebody who could read Hebrew who went through there and said, no. And somebody should have been on the AIG staff who read Hebrew from a believer's perspective, just like we talked about, Rebecca.
Mm-hmm.
And those people are rare. So anyway,
Mm-hmm.
are you finally going to finish your class?
Yes, sir. I'm sorry.
So, Robert, you see, this is why she doesn't get me involved in these things. Oh my. But anyway, all right, you want to go ahead and
Recording and hand it over to you, sir.
what was that? Who was that?
No, that was her. That was her. Was it?
Oh, Brother Robert just said haha in response to what you were saying there.
Yeah.
But yeah,
All right.
so I'll stop the
Very good.
recording.
Okay.
All right.